What would you do if you saw a little girl shivering barefoot on a Boston porch at 2 a.m., locked out in the freezing cold by the very person meant to protect her? Stories like this aren't just headlines, they're warnings. They're wake-up calls. If you've ever witnessed something like this,
Lily makes
share
up
your thoughts
stories.
below. And while you're here, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We want to know how far this story reaches.
It's my fault,
The night
isn't
was
it?
brittle, the
None
kind
of
of
this is your
Boston
fault.
winter cold that bit straight through skin and bone. On Brookline Avenue, the neighborhood looked picture-perfect snowbanks along the sidewalks, Christmas lights still clinging to porches from a season already gone, and houses sleeping behind drawn curtains. But in front of one of those tidy suburban homes, a 7-year-old girl sat hunched on the top step, knees pulled tight against her chest. Sophie Miller wore nothing more than thin cotton pajamas, dotted with faded stars. Her bare feet pressed against the frozen concrete, turning red and raw with every passing second. She clutched a frayed teddy bear with one ear nearly torn off, its stuffing poking through like tiny white scars. Sophie held the bear close, pressing her cheek against it as if the toy could shield her from the icy night. The porch light that once cast a warm circle above her had been switched off minutes ago. The last sound she heard inside was the sharp metallic click of the deadbolt locking into place. That sound echoed inside her chest, louder than the wind rattling the barren trees. For a moment, Sophie almost knocked. Her tiny hand trembled as she lifted it toward the door. But she froze. She knew better. The woman inside her stepmother, Karen, had made her wishes clear. "She'll forget soon," Sophie whispered to the bear, her breath a puff of white fog in the dark. "If I stay quiet, she'll forget." It was a mantra Sophie had repeated on nights like this. If she stayed small, silent, invisible, maybe the anger would burn itself out by morning. The neighborhood was perfectly still. Porch lights dimmed, windows shuttered. Not a soul awake. Even the Whitaker's old retriever next door didn't bark tonight. Only Sophie's shallow, trembling breaths moved in the frozen air. She tried to hide her feet beneath the welcome mat, rocking back and forth just to stay warm. She tried not to cry. Crying only made things worse. She couldn't remember the last time someone had held her without anger. She couldn't remember the last time she felt safe. She told herself not to hope. Rescue was for other kids. Down the block, a black sedan rolled slowly through the intersection, headlights slicing across snow-covered lawns. Inside the car sat Michael Carter, a man whose name graced glass towers and financial headlines. But tonight, he was nothing more than a tired soul in a crisp suit. His jaw was tight. His hands white-knuckled on the leather steering wheel. It was nearly midnight, and exhaustion had seeped into his bones, the kind of fatigue that no amount of money or success could ease. His phone buzzed again on the dash, another missed call from his assistant. He ignored it. The deal was done, the contract signed, but the emptiness lingered. He should have been on the highway home, but a road closure forced him down unfamiliar side streets. As he turned onto Brookline Avenue, something caught his eye. A small pale shape hunched near a porch. A raccoon, he thought absently. Maybe a stray cat. But as the sedan drew closer, the shape didn't move. The headlights swept across the steps, and what came into focus wasn't fur, but skin. A child, knees drawn up, arms wrapped tight around a stuffed bear. Michael's mind rebelled. It couldn't be. Not at this hour. Not in this neighborhood. His grip on the wheel tightened. The warmth inside the car, heated seats, polished wood, the faint scent of leather, suddenly felt suffocating. He slowed to a crawl. His heart thudded. As the lights fell fully on her, he saw her hair tangled, her face streaked with tears. She looked impossibly small against the darkened house. Michael's breath caught, as if the entire world had tilted on its axis. All the numbers, all the contracts, all the controlled power of his life suddenly shrank to nothing. He was staring at a child left alone in the cold. He flicked on his hazard lights and pulled to the curb. "What if I'm overreacting?" he muttered. "What if it's nothing? But the moment he stepped out of the car, the freezing wind slapped him, snapping him awake. His polished shoes crunched against frost as he crossed the yard, careful not to startle her. "Hey," he called softly. The girl flinched, shrinking back into herself. Her arms clutched the bear tighter, as if he might take it away. Michael crouched a few feet from her, lowering himself to her level. His voice faltered. He wasn't used to speaking gently. "It's okay. You don't have to be afraid. My. Michael crouched a few feet. Up close, he could see goosebumps on her arms, the bluish tint on her tiny feet. The sight twisted something deep in his chest. Without thinking, he shrugged off his heavy overcoat and draped it around her shoulders. She stiffened at first, but she was too cold, too tired to fight. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice cracking on the word. She shook her head, unable to trust her voice. "What's your name?" She glanced at the house behind her, fear widening her eyes. Then, barely audible, "Sophie." A pause. "Please don't tell her," I cried. Michael frowned. "Her? Your mom?" Sophie pressed her lips tight, refusing to answer. Her small fingers twisted the bear's torn ear. The silence between them was raw, heavy. Michael studied the dark windows, the bolted door. A quiet fury rose inside him, fiercer than any boardroom battle he had ever fought. What kind of person could do this? He reached for his phone, thumb hovering over 911. But Sophie's eyes locked on his, pleading, terrified, glistening in the porch light, pleading for something, though he didn't yet know what. "You don't have to be afraid, sweetheart," he murmured. "I'm right here. I won't let anything happen to you." Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. A light flicked on in a neighbor's window, curious about the car idling with hazard lights flashing. But for this moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. A shivering child, and a man realizing he couldn't walk away. Michael drew a long breath, letting the icy air burn his lungs. He wrapped an arm carefully around Sophie's shoulders, shielding her small body from the night. She leaned, just barely, into his warmth. For the first time in years, Michael felt something more powerful than success, more urgent than profit. He felt purpose. He rose slowly, guiding her toward the car. The overcoat dwarfed her tiny frame, making her look even smaller under the street lamp's pale glow. Each step forward, Sophie glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting the door to swing open and unleash more punishment. Michael opened the rear door of his sedan, letting the warm air spill out. He motioned gently. Sophie hesitated, her bare toes curling against the frosted ground. Then, clutching her bear tighter, she climbed in. As Michael closed the door behind her, the porch light above the house flicked on. The front door creaked open. A woman in a faded bathrobe stepped out, phone clutched in one hand, a scowl carved deep into her face. "There you are," Karen Miller snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the night. "Always sneaking off. Always causing trouble." Sophie froze in the back seat, shrinking into the coat as though it could make her invisible. Michael turned, his jaw set. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't a CEO, a strategist, or a deal-maker. He was something else entirely, something that terrified Karen the moment his eyes locked with hers. He was a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. And then, faint in the distance, a siren wailed, growing louder, drawing closer, painting blue and red shadows across the snow. Michael's hand tightened on the car door. What would the police see when they arrived? A concerned stranger helping a child, or a wealthy man out of place in the middle of the night? And would Sophie's trembling voice be enough to reveal the truth? The siren's wail grew sharper, bouncing off the quiet houses on Brookline Avenue. Red and blue lights began to wash across the snowy street, painting the night with flickering shadows. Michael Carter stood stiff beside his idling car, every instinct urging him to shield the small girl huddled inside. Karen Miller, her bathrobe fraying at the cuffs, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed in practiced exasperation. "There she is," she repeated loudly. Her tone aimed not at Michael, but at the neighbors peeking through blinds and the police car pulling up at the curb. Always sneaking off, always looking for attention. Michael didn't flinch. He wasn't used to silence and confrontation. His boardroom battles were fought with words, leverage, controlled force. But here, in the crisp midnight air, he discovered the power of simply standing tall, refusing to yield. The patrol car door swung open, and a uniformed officer stepped out, boots crunching against the icy street. His breath fogged in the cold as he scanned the scene. The expensive sedan with hazard lights blinking, the woman in the doorway with her angry posture, the man in a tailored suit standing protectively near the car, and finally, the tiny face, peeking out from under an oversized coat inside the back seat. "Evening, folks," the officer said, his voice steady but cautious. "Everything all right here?" "Ah," Karen wasted no time. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. This girl, my stepdaughter, she has a habit of running off in the night. Makes up stories. Cries to strangers for sympathy. I do my best, but she's been trouble since day one." Her words flowed easily, like a script rehearsed 100 times. Her performance might have convinced someone who hadn't seen the way Sophie clutched that teddy bear, or the way her bare feet had burned against the frost. Michael spoke, his voice low and measured. "Officer, I found this child outside. Barefoot. Freezing. Locked out of her house. You can see for yourself." The officer shifted his weight, his eyes moving back and forth between them. "Ma'am," he said to Karen. "Is this your stepdaughter?" Karen nodded, pressing a hand to her chest as though to emphasize her role as guardian. "Her father travels a lot for work. I'm the one who has to keep her in line. She just wants attention." Inside the car, Sophie buried her face into Michael's coat. She didn't speak, didn't dare. Her small shoulders shook with silent sobs. Michael crouched beside the open car door. "It's okay, Sophie," he whispered. So softly the officer almost didn't hear. "You're not in trouble. Not with me." The officer knelt, trying to catch Sophie's eyes. "Sweetheart, can you tell me your name?" Sophie shook her head violently, pressing herself deeper into the coat. "Can you tell me what happened tonight?" Silence. Only the ragged sound of her breathing filled the space. Michael met the officer's gaze, and in that glance tried to communicate everything: her fear, her fragility, the truth Karen's lies were designed to cover. The officer straightened slowly. His expression betrayed nothing, but his next words carried weight. "Let's bring in Child Protective Services. They can take a closer look at this situation." Karen's smile faltered for a split second. Then she forced a laugh. "Really, officer? That's unnecessary. She just gets dramatic sometimes. You'll see. She'll be fine by morning." But from across the street, a voice cut through the night. "That's not true." Every head turned. On her porch stood Nancy Whitaker, the neighbor in her thick wool robe, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Her gray hair glinted in the flashing lights. "I've heard the yelling," Nancy said firmly, her voice shaking only from the cold. "More than once. This isn't the first time that child's been left outside." Karen's face hardened. "Mind your business, Nancy." But the damage was done. The officer's eyes shifted, his skepticism now undeniable. "I'll need to file a report," he said, his tone firmer now. "CPS will have to follow up." Karen threw her hands up, feigning outrage. "Fine. Do whatever you want. I've got my own kids to think about. I can't babysit her every moment." Michael's jaw clenched at the word babysit. He turned back to Sophie, gently brushing a strand of tangled hair from her eyes. "You're safe," he murmured. "I'm not leaving." The officer gave a small nod. "Sir, if you'd like, you can stay with the child until social services arrive. She may feel more comfortable with you nearby." Michael didn't hesitate. Of course. The minutes stretched long in the freezing night. Karen retreated into the house, slamming the door behind her. The officer remained at his patrol car, speaking into the radio, paperwork already in hand. Nancy lingered, arms folded, watching over Sophie as though her presence alone could protect the girl. Inside the sedan, the heater hummed softly. Sophie sat, curled beneath Michael's coat, her bear clutched tight. Her lips were pale, her body trembling from exhaustion as much as from cold. Michael slid into the back seat beside her, leaving the door ajar so she wouldn't feel trapped. The silence between them was heavy, but not empty. It was the silence of a child learning, tentatively, that someone was willing to stay. Are they going to send me away? Sophie's voice was a thin thread of sound, barely audible. Michael leaned closer. No one's sending you anywhere you don't want to go. Not tonight. I'll be right here. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back, jaw set, with a determination far beyond her years. She says, I ruin everything. That I make it all worse. Michael shook his head, his voice thick with anger he kept carefully hidden. Sometimes adults say things that aren't true. None of this is your fault, Sophie. Do you hear me? None of it. A faint light flicked on in the neighbor's house. Nancy stood watching, her expression sorrowful but relieved. She had seen too much, remained silent too long. Tonight, she'd broken that silence. Time passed in the glow of red and blue lights. An ambulance pulled up quietly, its siren silenced now, tires crunching on snow. Two paramedics approached the car with calm efficiency. Hi there, sweetheart, one said gently, crouching to her level. Can we check you over? Make sure you're okay? Sophie recoiled at first, but Michael's steady nod reassured her. The paramedics wrapped her in a blanket, checked her pulse, listened to her heart. She flinched at their touch, but allowed it. Michael never let go of her hand. You're safe, he whispered again and again. I'm not leaving. One paramedic exchanged a quiet look with the officer. She needs observation. Cold exposure. Possible dehydration. We'll take her to Mass General. The officer nodded, making notes. I'll notify CPS on the way. Karen reappeared at the door just in time to see Sophie lifted onto the stretcher. See? She called out, voice shrill. All for attention. She'll be fine by morning. Sophie's small hand tightened around Michael's, as though her life depended on it. Her lips trembled, forming words only he could hear. You won't tell her I cried, right? Michael bent close, his voice steady. I won't tell. You don't have to hide anymore. As the ambulance doors closed, Sophie's wide eyes locked onto his. In that look was a plea, a question, and a fragile spark of hope. Michael knew then that whatever happened next, he couldn't simply walk away. The ambulance engine rumbled to life. Red lights reflected against the snow, against Michael's face as he climbed in beside her. Karen shouted something from the doorway, but her words were lost in the roar of the vehicle pulling away. Inside, the world narrowed again. The beeping of monitors, the warmth of the blanket, Sophie's trembling hand in his. For the first time in years, Michael Carter, man of control, of contracts, of empire, realized he was no longer negotiating numbers. He was negotiating a life, and in that moment, he vowed he would not lose. The ambulance turned a corner, Boston's skyline looming faintly in the distance. Michael looked down at Sophie, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, her breath uneven, but steadier now. And then she whispered, so faint it nearly vanished into the hum of the tires. If I talk, will they take me away forever? Michael froze. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the ambulance sped into the night. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing them inside a world of humming machines, antiseptic air, and the low murmur of paramedics exchanging clipped instructions. Sophie lay bundled on the stretcher, the oversized blanket nearly swallowing her tiny frame. Her teddy bear rested on her chest, clutched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Michael sat rigid on the bench beside her, his hand resting lightly over hers. He wasn't used to hospitals. He avoided them, like many people did, as if stepping inside admitted to his own vulnerability. But tonight wasn't about him. Tonight, every decision, every heartbeat, every ounce of his attention belonged to the child lying inches away. The city blurred past outside, neon signs and dark storefronts flashing by the narrow ambulance windows. Sophie's wide eyes tracked the ceiling panels overhead, unfocused, as though bracing for some invisible blow. "Pulse is steady," one paramedic said quietly, adjusting the monitor clip to Sophie's finger. "Core temps low, but stabilizing." The other paramedic leaned closer to Sophie. "Sweetheart, do you know what day it is?" She gave the faintest shake of her head. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now. We're just taking care of you." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She turned her face toward Michael instead, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Michael leaned forward, his voice quiet enough for her alone. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. I'm right here." She blinked slowly, her lashes damp, and gripped his fingers tighter. The ambulance pulled into the bay at Massachusetts General Hospital. The doors flew open, letting in a rush of frigid night air. Nurses in pale green scrubs hurried forward, their shoes squeaking on wet pavement. Sophie was rolled inside, past brightly lit hallways where the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the steady beeping of machines. Michael followed close behind, his coat still draped over her shoulders. The emergency room was a whirlwind of motion. Doctors called for charts, monitors beeped, and the antiseptic tang stung Michael's nose. Sophie's stretcher was wheeled into a small exam room, its curtain pulled partly closed to shield her from the chaos outside. A doctor appeared, her name tag reading Dr. Susan Harper. Her voice was calm, her movements deliberate, the kind of steadiness that spoke of years of seeing the worst and doing everything she could to make it better. "Hi there, Sophie," she said gently, crouching so she was eye level with the girl. "I'm Dr. Harper. I'd like to check you over, make sure you're all right. Is that okay?" Sophie's eyes darted to Michael. He nodded, offering a reassuring smile. After a long pause, she gave the faintest nod in return. "Good girl," Dr. Harper murmured. She slipped on gloves, her hands careful, respectful. She examined Sophie's arms, lifting the sleeves of her pajama top. Beneath the thin fabric were fading yellow bruises, faint marks like fingerprints left too long. Michael's jaw clenched. Fury boiled in his chest, cold and sharp. Dr. Harper's gaze flicked up to his, her expression grave, though she said nothing. Instead, she checked Sophie's vitals, listened to her heart, and finally sat back. Her temperature's stabilizing. She's dehydrated, a bit malnourished. "We'll run a tox screen just to be safe," she explained quietly to Michael. Then, turning back to Sophie, her tone softened. "You're very brave. You did everything right tonight." From the hallway, a voice sliced through the hum of hospital noise. "Thank God you found her." Karen Miller swept into the room, her bathrobe cinched tight, her face arranged into a mask of motherly worry. "She sneaks out sometimes," she told Dr. Harper, her voice dripping with practiced indignation. "Always making up stories. I can't keep up with her lies." Sophie flinched at the sound, her body curling inward. Michael stepped forward instinctively, positioning himself between Sophie and Karen. "She wasn't sneaking out," he said, his voice steel. "She was locked out, in the freezing cold." Karen's lips pinched, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're just some stranger." Before she could continue, Dr. Harper raised a hand. "Ma'am, I'll need to speak with you outside." Her tone left no room for argument. Karen sputtered, but a nurse gently steered her toward the hallway. Her voice carried even as the curtain swished closed. "She does this for attention. She's manipulative." The words hung in the air, like poison. Sophie's small hands trembled, twisting her bear's ear. Michael sat beside her, lowering his voice to a whisper. Don't listen to that. Not one word of it. None of this is your fault. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and glassy. Her lips moved, shaping a confession so soft he almost didn't hear. She gives me pills, Sophie whispered. Blue ones. She says they help me sleep. But sometimes, I can't move when I wake up. Michael froze. His heart slammed against his ribs, fury mixing with horror. Dr. Harper's face hardened. We'll add a full toxicology panel, she said firmly, already making notes. She knelt closer to Sophie. Thank you for telling us, sweetheart. You're very brave. Michael swallowed hard, forcing calm into his voice. He reached out. Close, but not touching. Letting Sophie see, his hand was there, if she wanted it. You're safe now, he promised. No one is going to hurt you again. For the first time, Sophie allowed her small hand to rest in his. Hours bled together under the harsh fluorescent lights. Nurses came and went, attaching monitors, drawing blood, wrapping Sophie in warm blankets. Through it all, Michael stayed rooted to the chair beside her bed, refusing to leave. Karen's voice drifted in from the hallway, alternating between crocodile tears and venomous whispers. She painted Sophie as a liar, a burden, a child desperate for attention. Each word drove a deeper wedge of rage into Michael's chest. At one point, a social worker arrived, a woman with a neat bun and a messenger bag slung over her shoulder. Angela Brooks, Child Protective Services. Her voice was brisk, but not unkind. I'll need to ask questions, she told Michael quietly. About what happened tonight. Michael recounted everything, finding Sophie barefoot on the porch, Karen's reaction, the neighbor's testimony, the ambulance ride. His voice was controlled, but each detail carried the weight of his anger. Angela took notes, nodding slowly. Thank you. I'll need to speak with Sophie when she's ready. Later, when the bustle quieted, Sophie stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, and her gaze immediately sought Michael. You stayed? She asked, her voice raspy. He smiled, though his eyes burned from exhaustion. I promised. Didn't I? A nurse brought in a tray of juice and crackers. Sophie stared at it uncertainly until Michael opened a small carton of apple juice, took a sip himself, and handed it to her. After a long pause, she drank. Her hands still shook, but less than before. Time inched toward dawn. The hospital windows glowed faintly gray, with the promise of morning. Michael's phone buzzed with unanswered calls, meetings he was supposed to attend, deals that couldn't wait. For the first time in his life, he ignored them all. His world had narrowed to the steady beep of the monitor and the rise and fall of Sophie's fragile breaths. When Dr. Harper returned with preliminary results, her expression was grave. There are traces of sedatives in her system. Enough to explain what she described. Michael's hands curled into fists, knuckles whitening. What happens now? We'll keep her under observation, Dr. Harper said. CPS will investigate further. Angela Brooks reappeared, her face tired but resolute. She looked between Michael and Sophie, then spoke carefully. For tonight, she stays here. Safe. But custody decisions take time. Michael's chest tightened. He thought of Sophie being sent back, her tiny voice whispering about blue pills, her fear of being invisible. He felt the old world of contracts and negotiations rise within him. But this was no business deal. This was war, and he was already enlisted. Sophie's eyelids drooped again, heavy with exhaustion. She shifted, curling onto her side. Her small hand reached blindly until it found Michael's. Don't let them send me back, she murmured, her voice breaking as sleep tugged her under. Michael bent close, his whisper fierce. I won't. I swear it. He sat there long after she drifted into slumber, the steady beep of the monitor echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet room. And for the first time in his life, Michael Carter realized he had found something worth losing everything else for. But outside, In the hospital hallway, Karen's sharp voice rose again, angry, insistent, echoing through the sterile air. She wasn't leaving quietly, and the system, Michael knew, had the power to send Sophie right back into her hands. The morning light seeped through the tall hospital windows, pale and gray against the whitewashed walls. Michael Carter sat slouched in the stiff plastic chair, his suit rumpled, his tie loosened. He hadn't closed his eyes all night. His gaze stayed fixed on Sophie, curled on her side in the hospital bed, her small hand still wrapped around his. The rise and fall of her chest, fragile but steady, was the only rhythm that kept him calm. Outside in the hallway, the world moved on nurses trading shifts, the squeak of carts carrying trays, phones ringing at the nurse's station. But for Michael, the world had narrowed to this room and this child. The curtain rustled, and Angela Brooks stepped in. She held a slim file tucked under her arm, her bun still neat despite the long hours. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Mr. Carter," she said, glancing at Sophie before lowering her tone, "I'll need to start the formal process today. That means gathering statements, documenting what you saw, and moving this case forward." Michael straightened, weary but alert. "Whatever it takes." Angela's eyes softened just a fraction. "I can see you care for her. But the system, it moves slowly, sometimes painfully so." Michael's jaw clenched. "Then I'll make it move faster." Angela studied him for a long moment before pulling a notepad from her bag. "Let's start with what you witnessed last night." Michael recounted every detail. Sophie barefoot in the snow, Karen's dismissive attitude, Nancy Whitaker's testimony from across the street, the way Sophie clutched his coat like a lifeline. Angela scribbled notes quickly, her brows drawn together. "I'll also need to speak with Karen Miller," she said. "And, when she's ready, with Sophie." The thought of Karen's manipulative words twisting the truth made Michael's stomach turn. He lowered his voice, fierce and protective. "She'll try to lie. She'll make it sound convincing. But you saw the tests. Sedatives in her system. Bruises on her arms. That's not a lie." Angela nodded, but her expression remained guarded. "I know. But cases like these are about building proof. It's not enough to know, it has to be undeniable." Michael leaned back, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. Proof. That was something he understood. In his world, proof came in numbers. Contracts. Evidence. No one could dispute. He knew how to fight on paper as much as in person. Later that morning, Dr. Harper returned with updates. "She's stable," she said softly, glancing at Sophie with a warmth in her eyes. "But emotionally, she's fragile. The trauma runs deep." Michael nodded, though his heart twisted at the word trauma. The day wore on. Sophie dozed in and out of sleep, sometimes murmuring in her dreams. Each time she stirred, her hand reached blindly for Michael's. Each time, he was there. By early afternoon, Laura Carter arrived, Michael's younger sister. Her presence was like sunlight breaking through clouds, warm, steady, grounding. She slipped into the room quietly, her eyes widening at the sight of the child in the bed. "Oh, Michael," she whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. "She's been through hell," he muttered. "And the system's going to make us prove it before they'll protect her." Laura rested a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll prove it." That evening, Angela returned with an update. Karen had been interviewed. Predictably, she'd played the part of the overburdened stepmother. A woman left alone to raise a troubled child. A girl prone to lies. A house full of her own children to manage. "She's good at twisting the narrative," Angela admitted. "She's used it before. There was a previous report 2 years ago from Sophie's maternal aunt. Claimed neglect. It was dismissed." Michael's blood ran cold. "Dismissed?" Angela nodded. "Not enough follow-up. The case was closed." Michael stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. He paced the small room, fury radiating off him. So she's been crying out for years, and no one listened. Angela didn't argue. She just looked at him with tired eyes. I'll do everything I can, but cases like this, they take time. Michael stopped pacing. His voice was steady now, the way it was when he closed a deal. Then I'll find proof. That night, after Laura had gone home, Michael stepped into the hallway and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Collins Investigations. Came the gruff voice on the line. David, it's Michael Carter. A pause. Then, curiosity edged with surprise. Well, that's a name I didn't expect. What do you need? Michael lowered his voice, glancing back at Sophie's room. I need you to dig. Deep. Custody records, financials, anything on Karen Miller. I want the truth. And I want it fast. David chuckled, though it was humorless. That kind of digging leaves dirt under your nails. You sure you want to get dirty, Carter? Michael's answer came without hesitation. For her? Yes. The next 48 hours blurred. Michael stayed at the hospital, barely leaving Sophie's side. He sat with her while she colored with crayons the nurses had brought, listened as she whispered fragments of memories about her real mother, how she used to sing lullabies that smelled like peppermint. Each small confession was a shard of her broken history, each one fueling Michael's resolve. When David Collins finally called, Michael's stomach knotted with anticipation. It's worse than you thought, David said flatly. Karen Miller was never legally granted full guardianship. I found forged documents sloppy, but enough to fool a clerk. And she's been draining Sophie's trust fund for months. Gambling debts, late payments, even an attempted wire transfer overseas. Michael's hand tightened on the phone. So this was never about care. It was about money. Exactly. And get this. She was at Western Bank this morning, trying to empty the account completely. She would have cleaned it out if I hadn't tipped off the police. Michael's chest heaved with fury. He imagined Sophie sitting in the cold, abandoned on the porch, while Karen schemed inside about money. Send me everything you've got, he said. That evening, Angela returned to Sophie's room. Michael handed her the files David had uncovered, photocopies of forged court papers, bank records, transactions that painted a damning picture. Angela scanned the documents, her expression growing more severe with each page. This is enough to push for emergency custody, she said finally. I'll contact the judge tonight. Relief surged through Michael, sharp and overwhelming. He glanced at Sophie, who was sketching quietly in bed, drawing a house beneath a rainbow. She looked up at him, tentative but hopeful. Does this mean I don't have to go back? She asked softly. Michael knelt beside her bed, meeting her eyes. That's exactly what it means, Sophie. You're safe now. For the first time, her lips curved into a real smile. But just as the weight began to lift, the hospital intercom crackled overhead. A voice announced security to the pediatric floor. Michael's head snapped toward the door. Moments later, the sound of raised voices echoed down the hall. Karen Miller's shrill tone carried, filled with fury. You can't take her from me. She's mine. Oh. Nurses rushed to block her path, but the commotion grew louder, closer. Sophie's eyes widened with terror. Her crayon slipped from her fingers. Michael stood, his body rigid, every nerve on fire. The curtain quivered as footsteps pounded closer. And in that split second, Michael knew this fight was only beginning. The clash in the hospital hallway still echoed in Michael's mind. Karen's shrill protests, the way Sophie had shrunk back in terror, the flurry of nurses and security guards rushing to restrain the chaos. It was a sound he doubted he would ever forget. But that night ended with a signed order from a weary Suffolk County judge, temporary custody granted to Michael Carter. For now, Sophie would not be sent back. For now, she was his responsibility. 2 days later, Michael stood in the polished marble lobby of his Back Bay penthouse building, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and Sophie's tiny hand tucked firmly in his. She clutched her battered teddy bear in the other hand, its ear hanging by a thread. The doorman's eyes widened as the pair entered, but he said nothing. He was used to seeing Michael stride through these doors alone, his presence commanding, his phone pressed to his ear. Tonight, the contrast was stark. The rumpled businessman leading a timid little girl, her oversized hospital-issued coat dragging against the floor. The elevator hummed as it carried them upward. Sophie's wide eyes darted to the mirrored walls, her reflection looking back at her, too small, too fragile in the cavernous space. When the elevator doors opened, Michael guided her down the hallway to the double doors of his apartment. He paused with his keycard in hand, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in. "This is home now," he said quietly. "For as long as you want it to be." He unlocked the door. The penthouse was immaculate floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Polished hardwood floors. Minimalist furniture in shades of gray and glass. It had always felt impressive to visitors. To Michael, it had always felt hollow. Sophie froze on the threshold, her small frame dwarfed by the vastness. The silence was heavy, unnatural for a place meant to be lived in. Michael bent slightly, softening his voice. "Go on. It's yours too now." She stepped inside hesitantly, her socked feet silent against the floor. She looked up at the glittering skyline through the windows and whispered, "It's so big." Michael followed her gaze. For years, he'd looked at that skyline and felt only distance. Tonight, it shimmered with possibility. He carried her small bag, what little the hospital staff had packed for her. Donated clothes, a few crayons, a pair of shoes half a size too large. He set it by the bedroom he'd prepared. A guest room he'd hurriedly transformed with new bedding, a soft lamp, and a nightlight he'd bought at a 24-hour store the night before. Sophie stood in the doorway, hugging her bear tightly. The bedspread was pale blue, the pillows fluffy, the lamp casting a warm circle of light. "Is this mine?" she asked, her voice fragile with disbelief. Michael nodded. "All yours. No rules, except kindness." She climbed onto the bed cautiously, running her hand across the blanket as though testing its reality. Her eyes shimmered with something Michael hadn't seen before, the faintest glimmer of hope. That first night, Michael hovered in the hallway outside her door. Every sound, every creak of the building, every distant horn from the street below made him tense, listening for her. At 2 a.m., he heard the soft shuffle of feet. He looked up to see Sophie in the doorway, her blanket dragging behind her like a cape, her bear clutched in her arms. "Can I stay out here?" she whispered. Michael spread a blanket on the couch and sat beside her until her breathing slowed, until her small body finally relaxed against the cushions. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the penthouse windows, chasing away the sterile glow of hospital lights. Michael, a man who had never once flipped a pancake in his life, found himself in the kitchen with a mixing bowl and a recipe he'd Googled at dawn. The results were questionable. Burned edges, uneven shapes. But when Sophie peeked around the corner and saw him fumbling with a spatula, something remarkable happened. She giggled. The sound startled Michael, then warmed him in a way no stock market gain ever had. He slid the pancake onto her plate with exaggerated care. "Gourmet. 5 stars," he declared. "Ah, gourmet." She giggled again, covering her mouth, before drowning it in syrup. Sticky sweetness dripped across the counter, and Michael only smiled, handing her a napkin. That day, Michael walked her to school. The elevator ride was quiet. Sophie's backpack looked enormous against her small shoulders. In the lobby, she clung to his hand, reluctant to let go. "You'll be fine," he assured her. "Just try your best. I'll be here when you're done." She studied his face, searching for cracks in his promise. Finally, she nodded and let the teacher guide her inside. Michael lingered on the sidewalk long after she disappeared into the building. For years, his mornings had been consumed by conference calls and chauffeured rides to the office. This morning, Standing outside a school with a child's trust hanging in the balance felt more important than all of it. When Sophie returned that afternoon, she clutched a sheet of paper in her hand. She ran tentatively at first, then faster into his waiting arms, holding up her drawing. It was simple. A stick figure man and a small girl standing beneath a rainbow. "That's you," she said shyly. "You're taller than the trees." Michael laughed, his throat tight. "Guess you'll have to help me reach the apples then." Each day brought new moments, messy, imperfect, yet quietly extraordinary. Sophie spilled milk and laughed so hard it came out her nose. Michael read bedtime stories awkwardly, stumbling over voices, until Sophie finally corrected him with a giggle. She began leaving her crayons scattered across the coffee table, taping her artwork to the fridge until the stainless steel gleamed with color. The penthouse, once sterile and silent, began to breathe, but shadows lingered. Some nights, Sophie startled awake, her eyes wide with terror, whispering apologies for things she hadn't done. Michael would sit with her until the panic ebbed, until she fell asleep again with her bear clutched tight. He never asked for details. He just listened, his presence steady. One evening, after a long day of coloring and board games Laura had brought, Sophie hesitated at her bedroom door. "Michael?" she said softly. He looked up from the book in his hands. "Yeah, kiddo?" Her eyes shone in the lamplight, her small hands twisting the hem of her pajamas. "Can I call you Dad? Someday? Not now. Just maybe someday?" The world seemed to hold its breath. Michael's throat closed. He turned away for a moment, blinking hard, before kneeling down to her level. He took her tiny hands in his own. "You can call me whatever you want, whenever you're ready," he said, his voice trembling. "But you've already given me more than I ever thought I'd have. I'm so proud of you, Sophie." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Then she whispered, "Good night, Dad." The word pierced Michael like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. He kissed the top of her head. "Good night, Sophie." That night, after she had fallen asleep, Michael stood in the doorway of her room. The nightlight cast soft shadows across her face, peaceful at last. For the first time in years, he felt whole, yet peace was fragile. The next morning, as Michael poured orange juice into Sophie's cup, his phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, flagged as Suffolk County Family Court. He froze, the glass pitcher suspended midair. When he answered, the voice on the other end was clipped. Official. "Mr. Carter, this is a notice of hearing. Custody of Sophie Miller will be reviewed at the end of the week. Karen Miller has filed a petition for full reinstatement of guardianship." Michael's chest tightened, the color draining from his face. He glanced at Sophie, who was busy arranging her crayons into neat rows across the table. Oblivious. The official continued. "You will need to present yourself before Judge Harris. Evidence will be required. Testimonies will be heard." Michael set the pitcher down carefully, his hand trembling. The call ended. Silence filled the gleaming kitchen, broken only by the scratch of crayons on paper. Sophie looked up, her eyes wide. "What's wrong?" Michael forced a smile, though his pulse thundered in his ears. "Nothing, sweetheart. Finish your picture." But inside, dread clawed at him. He knew Karen wouldn't give up. And he knew the system wasn't built on feelings. It was built on proof, procedure, cold facts. He turned to the window, staring out at the city that suddenly felt hostile and unforgiving. And he wondered, would the truth be enough to save Sophie from being dragged back into the darkness? The summons sat on Michael's desk like a threat carved in paper. The envelope, stamped with the seal of the Suffolk County Family Court, seemed far too small to hold so much weight. For days he had dreaded it, but now that it was here, the reality hit harder than he'd expected. Sophie sat cross-legged on the living room rug, coloring with quiet focus. The crayon squeaked softly against the paper. She looked small, almost swallowed by the vast space of the penthouse. Michael forced himself to steady his voice. "We'll have to go back to court, Sophie." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. Does that mean her? Michael crossed the room quickly, crouching in front of her. It means Karen wants to fight, but it also means we get to tell the truth. And I'll be with you every step. And she clutched her bear, her voice barely a whisper. What if they don't believe me? Michael's chest tightened. He reached out, resting a steady hand on her shoulder. Then they'll believe me. And the doctor. And the neighbors. You're not alone anymore. The week blurred into preparation. Michael met with Angela Brooks, who carefully organized the evidence. Karen's forged guardianship papers, the drained bank accounts, Dr. Harper's toxicology report, Michael's sister Laura compiled witness statements. Still, Michael worried. He knew how persuasive Karen could be. She could cry on cue, twist words into daggers, make herself look like the victim. And he knew the court system wasn't built for speed or simplicity. One evening, as Michael sifted through documents at the kitchen counter, Sophie padded in quietly, her socks silent on the floor. She slid a folded piece of paper across to him. I made this, she said softly. He opened it. A drawing, the courtroom sketched in crayon. A big wooden bench, stick figure people sitting on chairs, and at the center, a small girl with a speech bubble. I matter. Michael's throat tightened. This is perfect, Sophie. She shook her head. It's just a picture. He looked her in the eyes. Sometimes pictures say what words can't. The morning of the hearing, Boston was gray and wet, the streets shining with drizzle. Michael held Sophie's hand as they climbed the courthouse steps. She wore a new dress Laura had bought her, simple but neat, with her old teddy bear tucked under one arm. Inside, the family court was less grand than Michael expected. Sterile walls, fluorescent lights, the faint smell of coffee and paper. But the gravity of it pressed down on him all the same. Judge Harris presided. A middle-aged man with thinning hair and watchful eyes. He looked tired, but not unkind. Karen was already there, sitting stiffly at the respondent's table. She wore a pressed suit jacket, her hair neatly brushed, her expression schooled into sorrowful patience. She looked every bit the responsible guardian, except Michael had seen the cracks. As the hearing began, Karen's attorney painted a picture of a troubled stepchild, prone to lying, desperate for attention. Karen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, shaking her head in feigned heartbreak. Michael sat rigid, fury simmering beneath the surface. Angela Brooks rose, her voice calm but firm, presenting the evidence. Forged papers, financial theft, toxicology results. She called Dr. Harper to testify. The doctor's words were clinical, precise, yet heavy, with quiet condemnation. But it wasn't enough. Michael saw it in the judge's eyes. He needed more. Proof was on their side. Yes. But something was missing. Sophie's voice. During a recess, Laura leaned over to Michael. She should speak, Mike, if she's ready. They need to hear her. Michael's instinct screamed no. Sophie was only 7. She'd already endured too much. But then he looked at her, her small hands clenched in her lap, her bear pressed to her chest, her eyes steady despite the fear. She wants to, Laura whispered. When court resumed, Angela asked gently, Your Honor, with the court's permission, Sophie Miller would like to make a statement. The room shifted. Karen's head whipped around, eyes narrowing in alarm. Judge Harris hesitated, then nodded. Proceed. Briefly. Sophie walked to the witness chair, her legs trembling. Michael's heart pounded with every step she took. She climbed onto the chair, too big for her small frame, and hugged her bear tightly. Angela crouched beside her. Sweetheart, you can just tell us what you want us to know. Sophie's voice was small, but clear. She locked me outside. It was so cold I couldn't feel my toes. She said it was because I made mistakes. Her eyes darted toward Karen, then quickly back down. She gave me blue pills, She said they'd help me sleep, but sometimes I couldn't move. I was so scared. Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. I tried to be good. I tried to be quiet. But nothing made her happy. A silence settled over the courtroom, heavy and raw. Sophie clutched her bear tighter, her next words breaking like glass. Please. I just want to stay where I feel safe. Michael swallowed hard, his vision blurring. Even Judge Harris leaned forward, his eyes softening. Karen's attorney rose, ready to cross-examine, but the judge held up a hand. That's enough. The child has spoken. Sophie slid down from the chair, her knees shaking, and walked straight into Michael's arms. He knelt, holding her close, whispering into her hair. You were so brave. I'm proud of you. That afternoon, the hearing adjourned temporarily. The judge would deliberate, review all evidence, and reconvene within days. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky was streaked with faint gold, the first hints of sunlight breaking through. Sophie walked beside Michael, her steps lighter than before. Did I do okay? She asked softly. Michael looked down at her, his voice thick with emotion. You did more than okay. You told the truth, and that's stronger than anything. For the first time in weeks, Sophie smiled without hesitation. Days later, Sophie returned to school. The art teacher, Miss Johnson, noticed the difference almost immediately. During free period, while other children played, Sophie sat at a table, sketching a mural design. That's beautiful, Sophie, Miss Johnson said gently. Would you like to help me paint the class mural next week? Sophie blinked in surprise. Me? Of course. You have a gift. For a moment, Sophie didn't know what to say. But then she nodded, a shy spark of pride warming her chest. When Michael picked her up that afternoon, she ran to him, clutching her sketchbook. She said, I can paint the mural. Michael beamed. That's amazing, kiddo. I knew you had it in you. In that moment, Sophie felt something shift inside her, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she was more than invisible. But peace was fragile, and Michael knew it. Late that evening, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was David Collins, the investigator. You'd better sit down, David said grimly. I found something else on Karen. And it's not just about money this time. Michael gripped the phone tighter, dread coursing through him. What is it? David's voice dropped. Records. Old ones. CPS missed them. Complaints from neighbors years ago. And one hospital visit for Sophie. That doesn't match the story Karen gave. If this gets out in court, it could bury her case completely. Michael felt his pulse quicken. Hope surged, but so did fear. If the evidence was that damning, Karen wouldn't go down quietly. He looked toward Sophie's bedroom door. She was asleep, her bear tucked under her arm, the soft glow of the nightlight casting gentle shadows, and he knew Karen wasn't finished. The courthouse was packed tighter than Michael had expected. Family cases rarely drew much of a crowd. But word had spread, neighbors whispering about the child locked out in the cold. The CEO suddenly turned guardian. The stepmother, accused of theft. By the time Michael walked Sophie through the courthouse doors, Laura close by his side, the benches were full of curious faces. Michael held Sophie's hand firmly, sensing the tremor that ran through her. She wore a pale yellow dress Laura had chosen, soft but simple, her bear tucked under her arm. He bent slightly, whispering, Remember what you told me, truth is stronger than anything. We've got this. She nodded, though her grip tightened around his hand. Judge Harris sat at the bench, his glasses perched low on his nose, papers stacked neatly before him. His eyes swept the room, calm but unyielding. On the left, Karen sat stiff and composed, a sharp suit replacing her bathrobe. Her lips pursed into an expression of dignified suffering, her attorney shuffling papers beside her. Michael knew the act well. To the untrained eye, she looked like a woman fighting to protect a child she loved. To those who had seen beneath the surface, She looked like what she truly was, a manipulator with everything to lose. Angela Brooks opened with the state's case. She presented the forged guardianship papers, the missing trust fund money, the toxicology report that confirmed sedatives in Sophie's system. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin, but Michael could see Karen's lawyer deflecting, reframing, trying to blur the truth. "Your Honor," the attorney said smoothly, "children bruise. Children imagine things. And my client, Mrs. Miller, has sacrificed her own comfort to care for Sophie after her mother's passing. These accusations," he gestured dismissively toward Michael, "come from a man who barely knows her, a wealthy stranger who swooped in during a vulnerable moment. This is a custody grab, not compassion." Michael's fists tightened beneath the table. He wanted to shout, but Laura touched his arm, steadying him. Then Angela called the first witness, Dr. Susan Harper. The doctor's voice was steady, her tone matter-of-fact. The bruises on Sophie's arms and legs were consistent with repeated grip injuries. The toxicology confirmed benzodiazepines in her system, drugs not prescribed to her. These are not the results of clumsiness or imagination. Karen's lawyer cross-examined, but Dr. Harper held firm. Her calm authority cut through every attempt to minimize. Next, Nancy Whitaker, the neighbor, took the stand. The older woman's voice shook with emotion. "I've heard yelling from that house for years. I saw Sophie left outside before. That night, I couldn't sleep. When I saw her shivering on the porch, my heart broke. She deserves better than this." Karen's attorney tried to discredit her. "Mrs. Whitaker, isn't it true you've had disputes with the Miller family before?" But Nancy looked him straight in the eye. "My only dispute is with neglect." Michael felt a swell of gratitude. The truth was being spoken, piece by piece, no longer buried under excuses. Finally, Angela turned toward him. "Mr. Carter, please take the stand." He rose, buttoning his suit jacket, his pulse steadying into the rhythm of the moment. Years in boardrooms had taught him how to command a room, but this was different. This wasn't about profit or prestige. It was about a child's future. He spoke carefully, laying out every detail of the night he found Sophie. The snow, her bare feet, the trembling words. "Don't tell her I cried." His voice broke as he recounted the way she clung to his coat, the way her tiny hand had searched for his in the hospital bed. "Your Honor," he said finally, his voice raw, "I've spent my life chasing deals and building walls around myself, but none of it matters compared to her. She's not a project. She's not a transaction. She's a little girl who deserves safety and love, and I won't walk away from her." For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Even Judge Harris looked down at his papers, his expression unreadable. Then Karen rose abruptly, against her attorney's whispered protest. "He's lying," she snapped, her composure unraveling. "That child is manipulative. She makes up stories to get attention. You think she's innocent? She ruins everything. Everything she touches falls apart." Her voice cracked, raw with venom. The courtroom seemed to shrink around her words. Even her lawyer sat back, his jaw tight, realizing too late the damage she'd done. Angela stood calmly. "No further questions, Your Honor." The judge called a recess to deliberate. Michael and Sophie sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, Laura beside them. Sophie leaned against him, her head tucked into his arm. "Did I do good?" she asked softly. Michael kissed the top of her hair. "You were brave beyond measure. That's all anyone could ask." He tried to project confidence, but inside, his nerves rattled like glass. Judges didn't always see what was clear. Systems didn't always protect the innocent. And Karen, despite her outburst, still had a way of twisting narratives. When court reconvened, the air in the room was heavy, charged with expectation. Judge Harris shuffled his papers, then removed his glasses, staring out over the crowded benches. "This court does not take lightly the matter of a child's custody," he began. "The responsibility is profound, and the consequences are lasting. Having reviewed the evidence presented, the testimony of medical professionals, neighbors, and witnesses, and observing the conduct of the parties involved," he paused. Michael's heart pounded in his ears. "I find that Sophie Miller shall remain in the custody of Michael Carter. Effective immediately, he is granted full legal guardianship, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." The words landed like thunder. Michael exhaled, his hands trembling as relief crashed over him. Sophie clutched his arm tighter, her face lifting toward his in wonder. "Your Honor," Karen's lawyer sputtered. "This is—" Judge Harris raised a hand sharply. "Mrs. Miller's conduct, including fraudulent guardianship documents and financial exploitation, will be referred for criminal investigation. This court's concern is the welfare of the child, and it is clear where that welfare lies." The gavel struck once. Final. Sophie turned to Michael, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm home for good, right?" Michael's eyes blurred with tears. He bent, pressing his forehead to hers. Forever. Outside the courthouse, the sky had broken open into sunlight. Reporters lingered at the steps, snapping photos, calling Michael's name. He ignored them all. The only thing that mattered was the little girl clutching his hand, her steps light for the first time in months. Laura hugged them both tightly. "You did it, Mike. She's safe." Michael shook his head. "We did it. And she saved herself, too." She found her voice. Sophie looked up at them, her small smile trembling with something that looked like peace. For the first time, she believed it was real. That evening, back at the penthouse, Michael made another batch of pancakes, still uneven, still slightly burnt. Sophie laughed, syrup dripping down her chin, and the sound filled the space more beautifully than any symphony. They sat at the counter together, crayons scattered between them, drawings taped across the fridge. Michael thought of the courtroom, of Judge Harris's words, of Karen's venom and Sophie's courage. And he felt it settle inside him. A conviction stronger than any contract he'd ever signed. But as night fell, and Sophie drifted toward sleep, Michael's phone buzzed again. It was David Collins. His voice was low, urgent. "Michael, you should know Karen posted bail. And she's angry. This isn't over." Michael's eyes flicked to Sophie's bedroom, where the soft glow of the nightlight shone beneath the door. His hand tightened on the phone. For the first time, Sophie was legally his. But safety, he realized, was still fragile, and the battle for her future wasn't finished yet. The city had finally thawed. After months of gray skies and bitter winds, Boston glowed beneath a wash of soft sunlight. For the first time in a long time, Michael Carter's penthouse no longer felt like a monument to emptiness. It felt alive. Crayon drawings still cluttered the refrigerator, bright splashes of rainbows and stick figures taped proudly against stainless steel. A forgotten teddy bear lay face down on the couch, one arm outstretched as though waving. The air smelled faintly of syrup from that morning's pancakes burnt at the edges. Messy, perfect. Sophie hummed to herself at the table, bent over another drawing. She wore a simple cotton dress, her hair pulled back by Laura's careful hands earlier that morning. Michael watched her from the kitchen, his chest tightening at the sight. She was safe. His home, but shadows lingered. The call from David Collins still echoed in his ears, Karen posting bail, her venom promising more chaos. Michael had spent years outmaneuvering ruthless competitors, but none had scared him like one desperate woman with nothing left to lose. He had installed extra locks, arranged for private security, even considered leaving Boston altogether. Yet when he looked at Sophie, he knew running wasn't the answer. She needed roots, not more upheaval. That Sunday, Michael drove Sophie to Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. The spring air carried the scent of budding flowers, and robins hopped along the grass. Sophie carried a folded drawing in one hand and a single yellow rose in the other. They walked the path together, their steps quiet on the gravel. When they reached her mother's grave, Sophie knelt, her breath catching. The headstone was simple, the engraving worn slightly by years of weather. Sophie laid the rose at its base, then unfolded her drawing. 3 stick figures beneath a rainbow, holding hands. Her voice trembled but did not break. "Hi, Mom. I have a family again now. I'm safe. I promise. I'll never forget you." Michael crouched beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "She would be proud of you, Sophie. I know she would." Sophie's tears came, quiet but cleansing. And for once, she didn't hide them. The weeks that followed carried the rhythm of healing. Sophie painted her first mural at school. A sun so wide, it stretched across the entire classroom wall, its rays reaching every corner. Miss Johnson praised her gift, telling Michael privately, "She has an eye for beauty. She just needed someone to see her." At home, Sophie began to laugh more often, unguarded and bright. She still woke some nights, calling out softly in the dark. But Michael was always there, sitting at her bedside until sleep returned, whispering, "You're safe. I'm here." Oh, Laura visited often, her presence a steadying anchor. Together, they filled the penthouse with board games, puzzles, and late-night stories. Sophie began calling her Aunt Laura, the words carrying weight and warmth. One evening, as Michael tucked Sophie into bed, she hesitated. Her bear lay beneath her arm, the nightlight glowing faintly. "Can I ask you something?" she whispered. "Anything," Michael said. Her eyes searched his face, wide and shimmering. "Do you think my mom would be mad that I call you Dad?" Michael's throat tightened. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. She would be grateful. She'd want you to have someone who never lets you feel alone. And I promise you, that's what I'll be. Always." For the first time, Sophie relaxed fully into his arms, trusting the promise. The final hearing came quietly, almost anticlimactic, after months of tension. Karen Miller did not appear, her bail revoked, her case folded into a criminal trial that would likely end in prison. Judge Harris signed the adoption order with a solemn nod. From this day forward, Sophie Miller is the legal daughter of Michael Carter. May this court's decision bring stability, love, and hope. Michael's eyes burned as he signed the papers. He glanced at Sophie, who sat between Laura and Miss Johnson, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When the gavel struck, Sophie looked up at him and whispered, "So this is forever?" He nodded, his voice thick. Forever. Back at the penthouse, the celebration was simple but joyful. Laura brought cinnamon rolls. Mrs. Whitaker from across the street stopped by with flowers, and Miss Johnson gifted Sophie a new set of paints. That night, as the adults laughed quietly over mugs of tea in the kitchen, Sophie stood before them, holding up a drawing she'd finished just minutes earlier. "This is for anyone who ever felt invisible," she said shyly. The paper showed a rainbow arching over a house, with words scribbled in uneven letters. "You matter. You're never alone." The room fell silent. Laura wiped her eyes. Michael felt his heart twist with pride. Sophie had once whispered her pain in shadows. Now, she declared hope in color. Later, as dusk painted the city in pink and gold, Michael tucked Sophie into bed. The window cracked slightly to let in the scent of spring. He kissed her forehead gently. "Good night, kiddo." Sophie smiled sleepily, her eyes already closing. "Good night, Dad." Michael lingered in the doorway, watching her breathe. The penthouse, once so cold, now glowed with the quiet warmth of belonging. He stepped into the living room where Laura and Miss Johnson chatted softly. The city lights shimmered through the glass, indifferent but beautiful. Michael whispered to himself, a vow that carried into every corner of the home. "No child in my care will ever feel invisible again." The world outside kept spinning sirens, headlines, the endless churn of noise. But inside those walls, something precious had been reclaimed. Love, family, safety. And as the first fireflies of the season blinked faintly over the Charles River below, Michael knew spring had truly returned. Not just to the city, not just to his home, but to the heart of a little girl who once thought she didn't matter.